All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. My name is Destiny Johnson. I am a content producer on the marketing communications team here at NCARB. Today, our staff experts are going to share some highlights from this year's annual data report, NCARB by the numbers. We'll go over some key data points and trends on the path to licensure, and then we'll open the session to any questions that you all may have. So please feel free to send in your questions in the Q&A chat tool at any time during the webinar. After that, we'll dive into the webinar. Sorry, apologies. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Amber, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. Thank you very much, Destiny. My name is Amber Gershman. I am a data analyst in the Data and Analytics Department at NCARB, and I helped put all of the data together for this. Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny Kowecki. I am NCARB's Manager of Content Strategy, and I work really closely with our data and analytics team to put together NCARB by the numbers each year, as well as some of our other data studies and reports like Baseline on Belonging, our joint study with NOMA. So I'm very familiar with its content. I will pass it to Andy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andy McIntyre. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications. I've been with NCARB for about just over 10 years. I used to be project lead for NCARB by the numbers, but actually Jenny does that now. So I'm here as an honorary guest, maybe for my historical knowledge. I think that's why I'm here.
Thank you all for that. I think we can go ahead and dive into some key takeaways from the data report, and our panelists can get started with the presentation.
All right, I'm just going to share screen real quick. Okay, so we are here today to talk about the latest trends in architectural licensure. So first off, what is NCARB by the numbers? This, if you haven't heard of NCARB by the numbers, it's our annual data publication. We have been doing it since, I want to say, 2012. So it is a report that we do each year that highlights key trends in the profession and on the path to licensure. And we tend to do a lot of year-over-year look backs. So we look and see how things along our programs, along path to licensure, representation in the profession, how they have changed year over year, and where the trends are headed. So it features a lot of data from our record holders and the NCARB community. And next, Amber is going to tell us a little bit more about where that data comes from.
Yes, as Jenny said, this is our annual data publication to highlight data trends, and where we get that information is actually pretty much directly from you. When you self-identify in your NCARB record that you are a woman, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your date of birth, we take that information and we try to aggregate it anonymously. We also have a lot of information generated from our NCARB programs like testing, and experience submitted. And then we also obviously send out a lot of surveys. We try to collect data that way directly from you. And then we also partner with external organizations like NAB in order to get a high level view of architecture trends, things like enrollment numbers. Andy?
Hi, everybody. So let's just talk a bit about sort of what types of data you're going to find in the NCARB by the numbers publication. So, NCARB is lucky in the sense that we have this very specific role and specific optics on what's happening on the path to licensure, how many people are working towards license to earning their license. And we also work with a lot of the state boards, so we can also pull information from them to get insight into things like how many architects there are in the US. Is that number growing and changing over time? So we have a unique ability to talk about some trends in and around the profession of architecture in the US. So to talk a little bit more specifically, when it comes to things like NCARB's programs. So I'm sure many of you on the call today are familiar with the Architectural Experience Program and the registration examination. We're able to share things like the average time to complete those programs, how many people are actually working on them, and their sort of progress as they work through our core programs. Obviously, thinking about the number of people as well. So averages in time, but also just the number and the volumes of individuals working on those programs. And specifically, and we actually have quite a hefty section on the exam and how people are getting through the examination. And that's including sort of pass rates by division, which is, I think, one of the data points that people are interested in. We're certainly interested as well in that data set. And then thinking a bit more generally about the profession itself. So I mentioned earlier just now that we do pull data and gather data from the jurisdictions that we serve. And we're able then to talk about sort of trends in the profession more broadly. So how many architects are there in the US? Is that number growing? Is that number shrinking? What's the sort of representation of the profession? And one of the things we look at as well is our certificate holders. And as Amber just mentioned, we do have good demographic data that we're able to aggregate. So we're really all able to talk about the sort of demographic slices of people working towards the license and in the profession itself. And then one thing that we started doing in around 2017, 2018 was looking at attrition on the path to licensure. And were we seeing differentials between different groups in terms of how long they were staying on the path to licensure, or were there certain sort of parts of the path to licensure which were maybe causing a problem or creating bottleneck, or we were seeing a degree of attrition from say a particular group within our candidate population. And that's been really, really informative and important information for how we've shaped our programs over time. It's helped us make some policy decisions to improve things.
A great segue to our next slide, which is why do we share NCARB by the numbers? I love working on NCARB by the numbers. It's my favorite project we do each year. And I know some people love data and some people don't love data, and it's fine if you don't love data. You can still attend this webinar. But I hope that you will come away seeing the value in the data that is shared in NCARB by the numbers. We share NCARB by the numbers for a number of reasons. One is because openness is actually one of NCARB's core values. And so I think that we see it a little bit as our duty to the public and the profession to share the information that we have about our programs and services and to be transparent about how people are progressing through them. So a big part of NCARB by the numbers is offering that transparency so people can see what's changing year over year and how it's affecting the licensure pool, the profession at large, them individually. Additionally, as Andy said, it does help us make strategic data-driven decisions as an organization. We use this report internally as much as we share it externally. We look at the patterns that we see on the path to licensure. We look at that attrition information, and we use it to identify where there's pinch points in our programs, where we can offer additional resources, where we might need to do additional surveying to understand better the experiences that candidates are having, and then how we can change our programs for the better. And so I think over the past 10 years, certainly that I've been working here, NCARB has made a lot of changes to its programs and services to hopefully try to improve them for our candidates and improve that experience and remove barriers on the path to licensure that aren't necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And a lot of that comes from the information that's in NCARB by the numbers. And then additionally, I think there is some like public cause awareness. So we talk a lot about demographic information and we talk about representation in the profession. And that's one of the things that's most referenced in NCARB by the numbers. And I think it is helpful for people in the profession to understand what the profession looks like and what the trends are and how they can better support underrepresented groups in the profession. So now let's talk about some of the highlights from this year. Amber?
Yes. And can I just say, data is wonderful and everyone should be on board with data. It's an amazing tool. So I firmly support being a data nerd. One of the first metrics we look at each year is when we start compiling MBTN is how long it takes to actually become an architect from several points. We want to get a holistic approach to calculating this number because we understand how much of an impact it makes on people planning their futures and on people considering getting on the path to licensure at all. So we measure from two separate starting points each year. The first is the moment someone starts on the path to licensure, and that includes college, that includes the first time you join an architecture firm, anytime your very beginning to when you're actually ready, when you send your first transmittal. And for the first time, I think, well, since 2016 at least, it's dipped below 13 years, which is really, really wonderful. It means people are, we believe, potentially starting their records earlier. There's less of a delay in the crewing experience. And yeah, people are executing their the stages quicker. Now, we also measure from when you first open your NCARB record, and that has stayed pretty consistent at about 7.5 years. So that's completing the ARE and the AXP, the NCARB kind of dictated programs versus just education and any time in between. So this is starting to look really, really great. We don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket and assume that there's a trend here, but it's starting to go down, which is lovely. Andy, would you like to
Well,
speak about?
just before we move off that slide, though, if we could go back one, Jenny, because I do think it's worth clarifying because this number, it seems awfully long, right? So we always feel this number and sort of, sort of 13 years. And I think one of the things we're very conscious of is that we're obviously talking about an average time frame, and there's a good chunk of people who actually get through a lot faster than the sort of 12.9, 13 years. But there's also a lot of people that actually take longer than that. And that may be for a number of reasons. And we've actually really done some exploration around that and trying to understand the different stories and the different sort of human side of like what people's journeys were. So we've spoken to people who've done it with got from the start of their education, so start of college through to becoming licensed in sort of 6.5, 7 years, which is really going at a fair clip. And then other people who've taken decades, and that's often part of their own career journey. And maybe they were working in a firm and didn't feel like they need to earn a license, but then latterly did, and it became a beneficial thing for their career. So just always worth flagging. I think our take on it is that we want to see that number come down, and we feel that sort of it's a big number, and it would be great if it's shorter, and it would make licensure feel more accessible. But the reality is, it's a blend of a whole lot of different stories. So I think the key thing is that the pathway to licensure is there's many different ways of approaching it, I think really is the take, and we acknowledge that in this number. So sorry, I just wanted to express that. I'm happy to move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about another data set.
Also, it might be worth noting, you talked about average. There's a lot of ways to measure an average, and for NCARB by the numbers, if you see an average, what we typically mean is actually the median. So we use median for things like time to licensure. And Amber, I don't know if you want to explain it more from the data perspective, why we do that.
So there's several different, when people say averages, they usually mean three things. If we go back to elementary or middle school math, mean, mode, and median. The mean is essentially you take all of the numbers and then you divide it by however many numbers you have. Or you take the sum of all the numbers and then you divide it by however many numbers you have. That doesn't really allow for outliers. So if you have one person who takes 10 years, one person who takes 12 years, and one person who takes 35 years, the mean is going to be substantially larger than where the average is really clustered. But if you take the median, which is 10 years, 12 years, and 30 years, the median would be 12, which is much more representative of the population you're looking at. So we do try to take a look at both the mean and median because it gives us a much more holistic sense of what the data really looks like. We don't want to take just one number ever. We try to take a look at everything, but the median invariably is more representative of the population. So when you see a number that's aggregated up to this is an average, we're talking about median.
All right, moving to the next slide for real this time.
All right. So I did mention earlier that one of the things that we able to do is gather data from all the different states, the different jurisdictions around the US, and they report to us how many licenses they've issued, and that's an important piece of data for us to collate, and it means that we're able to sort of provide a narrative on sort of the health of the profession. Uh, how is it growing? Is it shrinking? And this data point is of interest to us. It's not actually represented in this particular graph, but it's that the total number of US architects actually fell by 4% to 116,000. We're missing a zero, Jenny. Don't know where it went. We just forgive. Just everyone just assume there's an extra zero there. 116,000 architects in the US from a 2023 point of 120,000. And I'll talk about this a little bit, but if we think about the profession, obviously we've got people who are sort of ending their careers, they're retiring, they're leaving the profession, and we also have the pipeline of people who are becoming architects who are entering the profession. If we look at the people entering the profession, which is obviously people completing NCARB's programs, we actually see that number actually rose. So, well, actually, the total. Let's clarify this. The number of people on the path, so how many people are working towards licensure, went up by 5% to 40,000. So, we're thinking about this sort of dynamic of, okay, we've seen a 4% decrease in the number of architects. Our theory on this is that this might be a symptom of sort of the baby boomer generation retirement. We've got some sort of fairly strong anecdotal evidence to suggest that pointers in that direction. The question then is, well, is this going to be a sort of traumatic shock to the profession? What does that mean if we're starting to see a increase in number of retirements and the profession start to shrink? We've been sort of waiting for that to happen for the last several years, and we haven't seen it. And this is the first year we have seen a dip in this number. But the good news is that the actual amount of people working towards becoming licensed is actually healthy and growing. And that actually is the data that's reflected in this chart. And you can see the three sort of the bars, obviously, if we look at the one on the right, 2024, you've got the darker blue at the bottom is the number of people who are submitting experience. So they're recording their professional experience for the AXP. The top lighter blue area on the top of the chart is the people taking the exam. So anyone who's taken one of the exams. And then the bit in the middle, is people who've done both of those two things. So the pathway is quite healthy, plenty of people working towards becoming licensed, but boomer generation might be contributing to a general reduction in total number of architects in the US.
Great, thank you. One of the things that is also included in this year's NCARB by the numbers is some data from a survey that we did in September of 2024, so about this time last year, around how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted candidates who were navigating the path to licensure, and especially the experience program. Because we know people are kind of tired of talking about the pandemic at large, or at least that's what my email click-through rates would suggest. But what we're seeing is a fairly long-term impact on candidates' licensure paths and career trajectories in terms of how the pandemic impacted what they were doing, what their firm was doing, the projects they were able to work on. And so we really wanted to gather that data and have some numbers to point to, in addition to the anecdotal evidence and the stories that we hear from candidates. And so we had around 2,300 people take the survey. Thank you to those of you who did, if anyone's watching. And they really shared some really helpful and impactful data about how the pandemic shaped their licensure experience at the time. So we asked them a lot of questions, which you can find more of in the full report. This is just one chart, but including how it affected their employment, how it affected the projects they worked on, how it affected the like experience areas they had exposure to, which is a big one that we saw. Um, and ultimately, around 63% of people who took the survey indicated that they believe they would have gotten licensed faster if not for the pandemic. And we do see that reflected in our data. We did see a dip in the number of people who earned their license during the years of the pandemic. And I think we're still kind of seeing that dip because so many people had their experience and their testing progress slow down during the pandemic. And so what I think we expect to see is some bigger increases in the coming years as those people continue to recover and move through the licensure progress that they might have made sooner were it not for the pandemic. They'll continue to kind of move through the process later and get that license. But some people also might not. Some people might have had their careers permanently impacted because we did see about 60% of people who take the survey report that they think their career trajectory was permanently altered by the pandemic. And I think that's similar to um, architects or licensure candidates who saw their career trajectories impacted by the recession in 2008, who saw their firm take on less projects or potentially close because of that recession. So I think that this, in many ways, is similar to that, and we're still seeing that impact shape our programs and candidates on the path to licensure.
And Jenny, just regarding that and sort of remembering back, one of the, an obvious factor was that the test centers closed for 3 months, and then you could argue that that was a 3 month add for everyone's timeline. But I think one of the data points that we had that was most impacted was the number of sort of NCARB records that were created through that sort of first year of the pandemic, and that's typically people typically create their NCARB records when they're really starting to beginning to gain experience in firms. And I think that was really a reflection on the whether it be the lack of opportunity for people to do internships as a student, or just getting their sort of foot in the door in those early career positions. And I think the market was just for very sort of, oh, let's look after the people we've got, and we definitely saw that challenge for sort of recent graduates in that first year.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look back at the slide you were just talking about with this number of candidates, we've recovered, we're higher now, but part of the reason we were lower before is because of the pandemic. So we've certainly seen growth, but part of that growth is recovery. All right, moving on.
This is one of my favorites. I love talking about the demographics of new architects because I think it's so important as the face of, the industry and how it's changing over years. When I first started doing this back in 2020, it was I mean, it's just really experiencing an upshift in equity, and I'm really excited about that. So last year, the graph we're looking at right now are new architects, and we have broke it down by white, people of color, and then gender, men and women. So the two darkest orange bars are going to be white and people of color, race and ethnicity. And you can see the white folks have stayed roughly even between 70 and 75% over the last 5 years, with some minor volatility in between. Um, and the people of color I mean, have pretty much just been growing. We see a slight dip this year in people of color becoming new architects, but for the most part, that is on an upward trend. And again, something we're really excited about, having more parity within the architectural industry. 42% of new architects last year were women. Um, and again, that's on par with a growing presence of females in the industry. Um, and it really goes to show you, and it really does reflect, it's because we're getting more diverse people joining NCARB as candidates. So 5 to 10 years ago, it was a predominantly white male, or actually 5 to 10 years ago, and beyond, it was a predominantly white male group of incoming candidates. And now we're seeing a lot more diversity. 46% of new record holders, or 46% of all candidates, licensure candidates, were women this year. And 49% of all licensure candidates identified as some person of color. So the idea that the goals that we have for making architecture a true reflection of the United States and what it looks like, we are really trying with some of our initiatives to appeal to a larger group, but also try to overcome the barriers that are already in place that put an undue burden on women, on people of color trying to get their architectural license.
I was just going to make a comment. Sorry, I
Yeah.
was just going to make a comment on the math. So anyone looking at that chart goes, "Oh, hang on a minute."
Oh, yeah.
Two things, when we look at sort of white and POC, they're not obviously adding up to 100, and that's actually because people can have multiple.
More than one ethnicity.
Yeah, and it's just worth pointing out that data point. I think that's why. So I can identify as white or an Hispanic, for example. So that's the reason.
Thank you. All right, next slide.
Okay. So this data set talks a little bit about pass rates as it relates to pass rates for the exam as it relates to where you are in your sort of experience journey and where you are in your sort of professional progress. And this is actually one of the data sets that we think is actually really useful and can help candidates really sort of prep and plan their approach to becoming licensed. And what you're seeing here is really thinking about you've got I'll explain this chart for a second. So you've got down sort of the column there, which is the 6 different divisions of the exam. And then across the top, so the sort of the horizontal axis is looking at where individuals are related to their experience when they take an exam. So the second column over, which is less than 33% complete, what that's saying is somebody who is taking the exam but they haven't yet, they've not got more than 33% through that corresponding practice area in the AXP. What's their probability of sort of passing the exam? What's the chance of them passing the exam? And in that case, it's 58%. The key point here, the key message is that you have the highest chance of completing of passing the exam when you're close to finishing the experience area in the experience program, or just after you've completed the experience. So in that sort of either you're 2/3 of the way through the exam through to 2/3 of the way through the experience program for that particular practice area, or you've recently completed it. That's the sort of sweet spot for taking the corresponding exam division.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite charts in NCARB by the numbers because I think it's really actionable for candidates, right? If you're wondering when the best time to test, candidates ask us that all the time. When should I start? What division should I start with? You can align it with the experience you're earning, and our data shows that will improve your performance on the exam.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. It's like, what are you doing in your day job? What are you doing at work? If you're very much focused on project management, right, and you've been doing that and you've been accruing hours and recording hours in that space, guess what? This is a good time to think about taking the project management division because it's going to be fresh, it's going to be relevant, and hopefully familiar and to what you're doing in your normal life.
All right, that's our last slide. So I'm going to hand it back to Destiny for our Q&A.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing those insights from this year's NCARB by the numbers. Like Jenny said, we are going to move over to the question and answer portion of our webinar. If you have a question you want answered, please enter it via the Q&A chat tool, and we'll do our best to get to it. Starting off, Jenny, how can I access NCARB by the numbers?
Great question. Okay. If you want to access NCARB by the numbers, you can go to www.ncarb.org/NBTN, and you should get right to it. There's also, when you go to that URL, you'll find our interactive website. You can also download a PDF of this year's publication as well, if you prefer, which will be on that same webpage. So ncarb.org/NBTN.
Thank you. Andy, where does the data in NCARB by the numbers come from?
Oh, well, it comes from multiple sources, but predominantly NCARB is here to, if you think about our sort of core and the fact that we are supporting candidates on the path to licensure, we support certificate holders who are architects in the profession. But what that means is we are securely holding data on how people have progressed. That gives us the opportunity to then aggregate that data. So we're basically pulling that data and collating it, aggregating it from our actual database. And we're able then to report on it. It's very important to us that when we report on things, that we're mindful of, obviously, data security, not giving anyone's personal information or exposing anyone's personal information. So, we don't do that, and we have some rules in place that will, for example, if we have a very small sample set, we won't report on it because we'll just say we don't have enough data in this space to be comfortable with that aggregation. But for bigger populations or bigger data sets where we've got, a couple of thousand of individuals, things like how people are progressing through the experience program, for example, we feel comfortable in doing aggregation and then providing this report and sharing insights into how people are getting on. And it comes back. So that's one thing. And then, so that's one data set. So that's the part of the data that we hold as part of our everyday work. And then we do reach out, and Jenny mentioned there's some surveys that we do. So sometimes the data that we collect at NCARB doesn't answer all the questions, right? If you are an NCARB record holder, you provide us a certain amount of data, but sometimes we'll have a question and we'll go, we don't really have an insight into that. So some of the collaborations we've done with NOMA that Jenny did mention earlier, that's allowed us to ask some more in-depth questions around experiential factors. And then we do pull data also from the state boards. So we annually ask them to share some information with us so that we can talk about the number of architects in the country, because they really are the only entities that really can shed light on how many licenses have been issued, both in terms of residential, like how many people did live in your state, but also reciprocal, how many licenses do you give to people who may be residing outside of your state, because that's another factor that we're mindful of. It's not just about the number of architects, but how many licenses are they collectively holding? But those are the primary, I think, sources of our data. I don't know if Jenny or Amber wanted to elaborate on that.
No, it's a great answer.
Yeah, very comprehensive.
Thank you. Amber, do you have any data on immigrant architects trying to get licensed?
So yes and no. We have data on all of our architects trying to get licensed, or all of the candidates trying to get licensed. We do some internal analysis, but one thing we're not necessarily interested in is singling out a specific community to measure performance. It really isn't kind of within the ethos of what NCARB wants to perpetuate, which is how does one group of people perform on this versus an entire group. And, obviously we do pass rates by certain demographics where there are enough, and Andy had mentioned this earlier, where we do require a certain critical mass, a threshold, in order to feel confident and comfortable that it's a representative sample size and that it's statistically relevant. So if we were to oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think we collect sort of an immigration status or citizenship.
Not immigration status, no, but if you go through the international architecture pathway, or if you've indicated that you have a registration on your record from a different country, then we could, I think, assume that they have at least international experience, which is, yeah, that's what I would assume. It would be a deduction, if you will, or a inductive, abductive reasoning. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when it comes to demographic information, that's an optional field for our record holders. So people do sort of have the choice of not providing that information. I think typically around 90% of record holders do feel comfortable providing it, and it's really helpful to us if people do, because it has allowed us to do some assessment in terms of how different demographics have progressed through the exam, for example. So we really do appreciate it when people are willing to share. Again, we only use that in the aggregate, but it is an optional field for people, and it's not something that we can require.
Actually, that's a great moment to shout out. If you haven't looked at your demographic information in my NCARB recently, I encourage you to go to your NCARB record and take a minute to look at it and make sure it's up to date, because we did recently, in the past 2 years, add some additional demographic options that you can select, including disability status, some additional gender identity and racial identity options, and I think sexual orientation, if you choose to disclose that. And I know sometimes people ask, like, why are you asking that, NCARB? And we're never going to use it against you. We're never going to use it related to you in the individual. We only use it in the aggregate. And mostly we use it to track information about how different groups are impacted disproportionately. So we use it to help you, and we hope that you'll share it with us, because it is helpful for us in order to know if our programs are disproportionately impacting a specific group of people negatively. So if you have the time, we would love it if you go to your record and look at your demographic information and share what you're willing to share with us.
Jenny, I think that actually dives us into the next question pretty well. So what is NCARB doing to address some of the disparities along the path to licensure?
Great question. I think we're doing quite a bit, not to sound like we're patting ourselves on the back, because I don't want to do that. And some of that I think is apparent externally, and some of it maybe is not. So there's really a lot to unpack there, and I will invite Andy and Amber to add to anything I say here. But I think we've been making a number of changes, including some that we've done recently that I'll touch on quickly, which is adding ESL accommodations, which we did a couple years ago in response to seeing data from our candidates who speak English as a second language, that they were having lower pass rates on the exam, largely because they didn't have enough time to make it through all of the exam questions. And so we started offering some accommodations for candidates who read or speak English as a second language that provides them with additional testing time and the use of a word-to-word translation dictionary on the exam. And we've seen that has had a very big positive impact on that group of candidates. I don't recall the number off the top of my head, but before they were performing quite below the national average on each division, and now they're performing much closer to the national average, still slightly below, but much closer to the national average pass rate on each division. Amber, you look like something.
I did. We looked at the numbers for people who had also taken the practice exam and had an ESL accommodation, both before they used the additional resources and afterward. And you're right, they aren't necessarily exactly at par with, like on par with the national average, but I think the average jumped by over 30% per division for people who are using the resources. The pass rates did. So it's a really, really wonderful indication that, some of the accommodations we've been offering do make a substantial impact on pass rates.
And I will say, if English is your second language and you're watching this webinar and you're taking the exam and you're not using that accommodation, Some things to note are that all jurisdictions accept divisions of the exam taken without accommodation. We don't report it to them, so it will not impact your licensure application in the future at all. So I would encourage you to take advantage of it if you're not. Um, Next, other changes that we're making to address disparities on the path to licensure. We part of that was part of launching the practice exams was part of that. We saw in our data from baseline and belonging and in our own pass rate data by demographics, how people of color and to some extent women were experiencing lower pass rates on the exam, and also from baseline and belonging that they had more difficulty getting firm support in terms of paying for the exam and getting test prep resources. And so we wanted to make sure that all candidates had access to free, high quality practice materials for the exam. And that's why we launched the practice exams. And we have seen those have a big impact. I think this year's data shows that candidates who take advantage of the practice exams before they take the related division are 16 percentage points more likely to pass the exam compared to those who don't. And so again, I would encourage you to take advantage of those if you're not already. Um, we also part of the reason that we retired the rolling clock policy several years ago was related to our data and what that showed us in terms of how it was disproportionately impacting certain groups of candidates. Similarly, the reporting requirement for the AXP that's being adjusted later this year is also a result of that data and information that's shown us about how that policy has impacted candidates and disproportionately. But then additionally, NCARB is also in the middle of a multi-year process of really reimagining our programs and revisiting what licensure should look like in the US. And that's called Pathways to Practice. And I don't want to dive away too much from today's webinar on data, but you can go to ncarb.org/pathways to learn more about it. And really for us, that is looking at what should licensure be and how can it be more accessible for candidates of all backgrounds. And so we're looking at things like education and how we can create more pathways for people with different education backgrounds to still make licensure accessible for them. We're looking at how we can make licensure more accessible for people who struggle with standardized testing, which we know is a thing that really impacts candidates. And we're also looking at ways to help candidates who might be disproportionately impacted by firm culture in terms of earning the experience we need. So we're really looking at all our programs holistically, and I think we'll have a lot more to share in the months and years ahead that we hope will be really impactful for candidates. Andy, Amber, anything you want to add on that front?
That was very thorough, and you hit a lot of the notes. I think that the big picture addition I would say is that, for us to be involved in the NCARB by the numbers publication over several years, it's been really positive to see the organization respond to those data sets and actually make policy and programmatic changes in light of them. So, it's a great feedback loop for us to say, we did it, we reported on it, but it doesn't just go out into the ether. We've seen the organization respond to some of these trends. So we're kind of proud of that fact, I think.
Thank you. Thank you all. Another question here for you, Andy or Amber, or whoever would like to chime in on this one. Is there any data on candidate income as it relates to becoming licensed?
I love that question.
I would say that we did do a in our baseline on belonging survey, one of, or I think was it the original or I think it was the follow-up.
The original, I think. Right?
Mm.
Maybe.
I I can't remember if it was the original or the one of the secondary ones, but remember we did look at it. And we don't capture that information right now in the My NCARB portal. I do think it would be a very interesting uh thing to look at, but maybe on the next iteration. But So we only have a snapshot of it in time based on several thousand respondents. So we have a large, community of hundreds of thousands of architects and architecture candidates. So we only have a snapshot of a very small percentage of that. We don't have, I would feel uncomfortable making extrapolated hypothesis based on what we were able to capture, both I think we looked at it both the moment in time and also how people grew up and how that socioeconomic status was able to or it impacted their path to licensure. And I think both would be incredibly informative as to some of the barriers people experience while trying to get their license. But yeah, do you know, Jenny or Andy, do you know if we have any plans in the future to explore that going forward or potentially incorporate it into regularly collected data?
I, no, you go ahead.
Well, I think when it comes to sort of salaries, and this is a bit of a sort of what's NCARB's role in the profession versus what's AIA's role in the profession, right? So, as the I think it's worth reminding people that our mission at NCARB is really about the health, safety, and welfare protection, right, for the public. So when we think about obviously we yes we understand that we serve architects and future architects and we want to be super helpful on their path to licensure, but the fundamental mission is to help protect the public and to support that piece. What that means is that when it comes to, shall we say, the economic health of the profession, right, we kind of defer to the AIA on that topic a little. I think that said, things like the cost of education, when that is mandated by the licensure process, and we know that that is playing a part in people's consideration about career choice, for example, and a legacy impact for, say, student debt, for example. I think that those kind of factors are more in the wheelhouse of NCARB to be considerate about and thinking about how our program requirements and the licensure requirements are sort of imposing a cost on individuals. And if you take that premise and you say, all right, drill that down a little bit. So, things about like how much does it cost to get licensed to go through our programs? How can we support people with, say, the free practice exam so that they aren't necessarily having to pay out as much for test prep, for example. So we think about these things. There are certain areas where we're not sure if it's our mission statement or realm to really dig into.
The only thing I would add to that is that, yeah, I 100% agree with Andy. You're unlikely to see that information in NCARB by the numbers at any point in the future, really. But we do have our baseline on belonging, building on belonging project that we do in partnership with NOMA, who, like AIA, have that arm in the profession, the professional society aspect, and salary data, especially viewed by demographic information, because to my knowledge, that is not something that's part of AIA's salary data right now, is something that has come up often in terms of the discussion in that project. And so that is something that could potentially come out of that partnership in the future, but I don't think it would be necessarily NCARB data.
Yeah, fair.
Thank you. Another somewhat related question, I think that anyone from the group here can answer. Has NCARB ever thought about exploring data related to firm size?
So this is another thing. Back in 2020, 2021, I think, we actually had a very, very large partnership with a company that supplied us a lot of information about the size, the kind of profit margins. Like we got a slew of information about firms, and based on like the managing directors, the structure, etc. And based on the experience reports that people were submitting for their experience, we were able to try and match the firms that they listed to the firms that we had gotten information about. From there, we were able to group things or group reports and people into whether or not it was a small firm, a mid-sized firm, or a large firm. Now, this was all at the beginning of COVID. And since then, we haven't refreshed that partnership. Um, but so right now, I say we would have information on about 40% of the firms that are that people submit reports with. And which is a healthy number, but it doesn't meet our threshold for actually reporting on it. So in past years for NBTN, if you go back and look, you will see demographics, including firm size for some of the AXP reports or some of the AXP charts. But until we refresh that data, until we can get more information on new firms, on how the demographics or the sizes have shifted over the years, we don't feel comfortable reporting on something that we're not confident in. So that is one thing you can really trust on us, is that we will not report on something we don't 100% feel confident in. And that is something that we need to refresh before we include it again.
Great. Thank you. Another question for you, Jenny. Are there any key takeaways for licensure candidates from this year's data?
Great question. Okay. Yes, I would say yes. Now I will asterisk these suggestions with the fact that you know your own personal situation best. So don't do something just because some NCARB staff member on a webinar told you to. It's my legal disclaimer. But I will say, I think that chart that Andy talked to earlier that has the heat map of pass rates by experience progress is really impactful. And I would really think about that when you're making your exam strategy, about how you can align when you're testing with when you're earning experience so that it is fresh in your mind and you're remembering what you worked on, and it can inform how you take the exam. So that's my first takeaway. I would also say take those practice exams, use those practice exams. I know there's only one per division, and I know candidates are always like, okay, but when's the next set coming out? I promise you, NCARB's working on it. We're thinking about it. And we're working on ways to do that are most impactful and most helpful for our candidate community. So I'm not going to promise anything in the near future, but stay on the lookout for more news from us in the long term. We're always looking to create more resources for our candidates. But do take those practice exams. Our data shows they are helpful. Do take advantage of accommodations, whether that is ESL accommodations, English as a second language accommodations, or ADA accommodations. If you have a disability or a chronic medical condition, or even a temporary medical condition, such as being pregnant, we do have accommodations. And based on our recent Building on Belonging survey related to accommodations and disabilities, a lot of candidates with disabilities don't take advantage of those accommodations. And the most frequent ones I think that we see are things like additional break time and additional testing time. So just know that that's something that is available to you, and that data doesn't get shared with your licensing board when you apply for a license. It is private, but that is something that exists as a resource for you, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. And our data does show that it is impactful. They are helpful, so do use them. And then otherwise, I think just having a strategy is helpful. Having a plan for your licensure path is helpful. I think when we look at data around when people fall off the path to licensure and around how long, like for people who do stop pursuing licensure for a period of time, like how many of them come back versus like how long they were away for, like people who stay focused or only step away for a short period of time are more likely to make it through to the end and earn that license. So really have a plan and try to stick through it. And I think that you'll get there in the end. I know it's challenging. I'm not trying to downplay the fact that licensure is challenging, but I do think having a plan and trying to stick to it can be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. We are getting close to time here, so one last question to wrap us up. Amber, What data does NCARB have on people pursuing alternate education paths, such as people who didn't get a NAB accredited degree?
Well, couple different things to that. One is not every jurisdiction requires a NAB accredited degree. So if you don't have a NAB accredited degree, look around. We actually have a wonderful tool on our website that allows you to take a look at the requirements per jurisdiction. And so if, you live in Ohio and it requires a NAB accredited education program in order to get a license, maybe look at a neighboring state. I don't want to put
Wisconsin.
anything. What?
It's in
Oh, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, thank you. I
So
knew
there's
there was one in the area. Um, but not just NAB accreditation, because sometimes, people aren't great test takers. Sometimes they didn't necessarily, well, they went a very different path. Like they got a French degree for their education, and it wasn't just non-NAB; it was non-architecture related. We do have several alternative paths to licensure. At this point, the completion time um, and I would say that's the only metric that we would have that would really be consistent across all paths. And at this point, we don't have enough people taking those paths and completing the path to really report on it. So again, we want to make sure it's statistically relevant. And we want to make sure we need everyone to have gotten their certificate in order to look back to see how long it took them. Um, we have demographic information for them, but again, it doesn't meet the level of critical mass that would allow us to be comfortable in sharing that. We are really, really, as Andy mentioned earlier, we're really, really tied to data ethics and making sure that we don't release any information that could identify anyone in any jurisdiction or any stage in their career. We want to make sure that we're protecting you. So if we don't have enough information and we think that someone might be identifiable, we're not going to release that information. That being said, the Pathways to Practice, this new and very, very exciting multi-year, multi-stage kind of revolution within architectural licensing, is going to open up a huge amount of pathways for people with non-traditional education, non-traditional experiential paths. So I think right now, we're really, really gearing up to accommodate a lot more diversity in experience and education and um, methods of, how do you say? Um,
Demonstrating competency.
Thank you. Yes, methods of demonstrating competency. And we will have that information. And in like 3 to 5 years, I will absolutely give you all of the information you can imagine, and you will be swamped with data and you will tell me to stop. But until then, I can't really do that.
I just to pick up on Amber, on your comment about the fact that we do have I think 18 jurisdictions that don't require an NAB degree or have opportunities outside of the NAB degree to get licensed. And it's important that we recognize the fact that there's states that have never imposed at any point in their time, like you have to have a NAB degree to get licensed in the state. And what the reason that's important to us from a conversation perspective is that we have real life examples of states where alternative paths have been in existence for a long time, and there isn't any evidential sort of discrepancy in terms of those states and their sort of safety track record when it comes to the built environment to really to raise alarm bells for those states that currently do require an NAB degree, and that's what we want them to explore and be mindful of. So yeah, it's we hope Pathways to Practice will see evolution in that space and greater opportunity for people.
Great. Well, that wraps up our webinar for the day. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for sharing those insights. If you have any further questions or if you'd like to watch the recording, it'll be available on our YouTube channel for you to watch. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.